Hello, Newsweed. Welcome to episode 4 of the Living Room podcast. Today's episode is on stress. I have my guest, Ian. Would you like to introduce yourself?
Yo, hi Hunter. Thanks for having me here, man. I'm Ian. I have known this stressful person right here for a while. It's been probably what 4 or 5 years since I've known you. I
Yeah,
think
since,
five.
since sophomore year of high school?
It's been a journey.
Oh, yeah, it really has been.
But thank you so much for having me here.
Of course. And so the topic for this episode is stress. And I just want to talk about that on a broad spectrum. I feel it really kind of correlates with like the first episode. It's kind of in that range of emotion where it's kind of anger and it's kind of sadness. It's different. It's kind of difficult to describe because you wouldn't describe it as either anger, like full bore, but you wouldn't also describe it as like depression full bore, but it kind of has a mixture of both of those things, and so I thought it'd be an
I
interesting
think
thing to talk
I
about as a
think
broad topic.
stress I think stress is just such an overarching aspect of our livelihoods, right? And I feel like some people could argue that there is positive stress when you are trying to kind of push yourself forward, but that's not the way that we usually see it. It's not the way we usually represent stress, right? So usually it is in the negative aspect. And you bring up the first episode of the podcast, which was mainly around boredom, right?
Hmm.
And similar to boredom, you could definitely say that stress is happening all the time. It may be to sometimes you're less stressed, sometimes it's more, and sometimes you might even be completely without stress. Although after you're like 18, it's almost impossible to live fully stress free. I think. Like,
Once you, yeah, once you get in that kind of awareness, it's kind of hard when you like reach
yeah,
that
it's like
age.
when adulthood responsibilities and life hits you, and it doesn't just hit you; it's more like a freight train. It really becomes almost unavoidable. So I think it's more of just like managing and living with it and understanding it.
Yeah. Well, the thing with that stress, or why stress just happens when you're older, is because you're a kid. When you're a kid, it's just life isn't really anything more than playing with your toys and having fun and having friends. I mean, you have this idea of a future. Maybe like, oh, I want to be an astronaut, or I want to be this or that. You might have those cool dreams, but you're never worrying about how you're gonna get there. Oh, the next thing you say might prevent you from getting that job. You're just like, I'm gonna be a fucking astronaut. Who cares? It doesn't matter. There isn't any stress. I mean, there's obviously the kids who abusive parents, parents that are not in their lives, and they probably have stress. But for the most part, if you're a kid, you don't. Once you realize you have to do certain things in a certain way to get to a goal, you start stressing, and sometimes things stress you out more and sometimes they stress you out less, but once that like awareness of having to accomplish things uh gets you, stress just kind of exists.
I think you kind of touched on something, which is where once you're growing up or whilst you're growing up, nothing really matters that much, right? There's a sense of freedom and liberty from the weight that stress really gives you on your shoulders. I'm not saying that growing up is stress-free because, when you're growing up, you still need to do well academically. You might be stressed to perform really well in sports or musically or being involved in different things. But I think that outside of the academic sphere, when you're growing up, you're inherently not stressed. Unless you give yourself that, right? So one thing you mentioned is up to the point when you realize that there's things you need to do to lay the groundwork for other things. So I think high school is when that really becomes a thing because all throughout middle school, nobody really cares about their future. Nobody even takes that into account. I'm not saying that is, you know, a fact for everyone, but it is the norm. Now, when you get into high school, you usually have multiple ways of approaching it. It could either be really stressful, working towards a already like your future in college, or not giving a damn. Um, Both can work. It all depends on kind of where you want to go and how much stress you want. You know, because you could argue, right, that you spent all your high school years not giving a shit, and then after that, you finally start caring maybe like few last months of the senior year. But then you're gonna have so much stress because you didn't care before that you really gotta. I wonder if it was worth it to take that approach. I don't know. I think I think there's not really a huge point in looking at kind of like high school years and middle school years because we can definitely agree that it is less stressful
Yeah.
than what follows it.
Well, I think I started truly feeling stress maybe junior year of high school because I just started being more aware of myself as a person. Uh, and I realized, oh shit, soon I'm gonna go to fucking college. I gotta get my life in order. I gotta know how to act. I gotta know how to be an adult, and I'm still learning how to be an adult. I saw a meme recently, and I know of a meme, whatever, but it said, I sometimes I don't really feel like an adult. I just feel like a child doing his best in a costume or some shit like that. That's what the meme said, and I don't know, it was some stupid SpongeBob meme, but it's
So
so real.
it's so funny that you bring that up because earlier today, I saw a video from a comedian on YouTube,
Uh-huh.
and he did a skit, and the whole skit was adulthood versus childhood. That was the entire concept of the skit, and I find it just so fitting that is the skit that I got to see today, and then you mentioning that because the skit, a lot of the different parts of the skit is him, okay, so how would an adult see X and how would a kid see X? And a lot of the times it is the exact same behavior, just like at a basic level, it is the exact same behavior. It's just kind of slightly twisted to an adult format, but at the end of the day, you're still just acting like a kid with the same enthusiasm, the same excitement. You just change a few words and change definitely the more involvement there is, of course, as you're an adult. But I think I don't know. You can you can say that being an adult is just being a kid with more responsibilities. I think that's how I would say that.
That really makes sense because I did my taxes for the first time because I had my first like legitimate job. And I was just stressed out. I was like, man, why am I making this kid do all this stuff? I'm like, wait, I'm not a fucking kid. I'm 20. I'm 20 years old. I'm not a kid anymore. They should be
So
making me do this. This is what I expected.
yeah, so you were mentioning when you started stressing out. I will be honest, I started stressing out the moment I hit high school, right? So slight backstory for anyone watching. I moved from Puerto Rico to Houston, and as an only child, you might be wondering why did that happen and what does being an only child have to do with it? Well, the only reason that I moved in my sophomore year of high school to Houston was because I was stressed out over the fact that the career I wanted to pursue wasn't really available in Puerto Rico. So I had to go a place where I could get the internships, get the proper education, and lay the foundation while I'm still in high school to then go to that career path. So I started making that decision, and my family consciously made that decision when I was going into high school. So even from that point, I understood the sacrifice and the stress that was put on my shoulders to succeed and to thrive, right? And which is which is why earlier I said that the stress you put it onto yourself most of the time, right? Most of the time it is a decision you make. Sure, your family might pressure you to be successful. They might want you to be academically successful, but ultimately you can just not care and not do it, you know? Um, so I think, at least for me, I've definitely had that weight, that sense of stress for a very long time, and until probably less than a year ago, I struggled so much with figuring out how to manage it, how to better handle myself, and not just in stressful situations, but in the situations where stress can lead into far worse things.
Mm. Mm, I the thing that kind of helps with my stress, and what I've noticed in change of stress is environment has a big deal, a big play. So, I'm lived in Houston from the time I was a baby till I turned what, like 18. I was still living there, and I moved to Arkansas. I don't know, for some reason I have not felt as stressed as I felt when I was in Houston. And to be fair, I mean I've only lived here 2 years, but it seems like, sometimes the place you live and you can just look out and see trees and see mountains and beautiful stuff. I feel like those kinds of things, even if it's not like beautiful nature, mountain stuff, you know, is the place you're around comfortable, Does it look presentable, And those kinds of things really, I think, do affect how stressful and how stressed you are.
Well, to me, I think it is the sense of disconnect that you can create with your surroundings, right? So, Houston is a ginormous city where if you want some peace and quiet, if you want a place where you can disconnect from the daily hassle, good luck. um, maybe you can just, I don't know, get drunk or try to find some park, but outside of that, there's not much to do. I mean, I guess you can go partying, you can hit bars and stuff, but it's not the same. I think that to handle stress, by the way, I don't want to make it sound like I'm saying like, oh, are you stressed? Go get wasted. That's not what I'm saying. That's a horrible thing. At least for stress management, I think. Um, but it is finding a way to disconnect, finding a place where you can be comfortable and almost tap out, almost forget those daily hassles and those daily stresses. And I think one of the reasons that Arkansas has been such a great place for you to do that is the fact that you're surrounded by the ability to disconnect. All you have to do is go probably 15, 20 minutes, and you can find a place surrounded by nothing but nature, by quietness, where you can forget, even if it's for a moment, all that which you have in the back of your mind. And that is just something that you don't really get to do in a place like Houston. So I think that's where that comes from. And it really kind of allows us to almost branch over to the topic of how to disconnect and how to put yourself in a mindset where you can better handle stress and you can almost pace yourself. Because if you're always so stressed, if you're always so worried about everything, I feel like we often forget to actually live. You
Hmm.
know, um, despite all the pressure I would put myself in high school, there was a moment in high school where I was working about 30 hours a week while still taking four classes, and I had basically almost no life. Uh, and that was just high school, not even talking college, where a lot of people have to do the exact same thing.
Hmm.
Uh, I think something that's really important is just giving yourself that time to kind of just settle down, that time to breathe. And it's really difficult because most of the time you don't think about it and you just move on to the next day like it's nothing. But it's
Hmm.
so crucial to allow yourself a moment to de-stress. Um, during those days when I was in high school, I would always tell myself the following thing, that if I didn't laugh today, then my day wasn't a good day. That was like my metric for success in a day. It's just laughter. And because to me laughter usually equated with, okay, I had a good time. And for me stress management is dealing with the negative and the positive. It's pacing all that stress and responsibility and adding some fun, adding some ability to disconnect, whether that is through gaming, through hanging out with your friends, to going out to a quiet place. It is so crucial and important for everyone to be able to find that point of disconnect.
I feel like disconnecting with the surroundings is definitely important, but I feel like a lot of people, instead of disconnecting with their surroundings, they disconnect from themselves, uh, and that just leads to more stress because they just get lost and they don't know what they're doing. That's what I find that a lot of people have. They kind of don't know the difference between disconnecting from your surroundings and some of the stresses in your life, and then disconnecting with yourself in reality. And I feel a lot of people go to disconnect with reality because that's a lot easier. That's just smoking pot because I just feel bad, or going out and partying excess every time you're stressed. They don't ever find anything that's like centers themselves in any way. I feel like that's what a lot of people do. They end up just disconnecting. Escapism.
Escapism is such a problem, and even like I can't be here talking to you and say that I haven't done it because I feel like at some point every single person has turned to escapism when under stress.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Earlier, I mentioned that it wasn't until very recently that I figured out how to best manage stress. And what I meant with that was not that I didn't have options on how to not be stressed. I didn't have good options. Now, good is very subjective, but to me, good options handling stress is ways of handling stress that are not in any form negative to you, ways that are actually productive and will lead to um, kind of just a better future for you. So let me explain kind of what I turned to that was really good. And this didn't just help me with stress, this helped me with a point in my life when I was depressed. And it is just finding productive things to do. So one thing I did was adding something to my daily routine. Instead of focusing so much on, oh, work, school, this, that, academics, let me start going to the gym for about an hour and a half. Why not?
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't have to be much, maybe less, maybe just 30 minutes. Just add something to the routine where I don't have to think about anything else. All I gotta think about is what I'm doing here and now, and that's it. Do that for an hour, just listen to music or whatnot, and just be in the gym for an hour. Or maybe just run around. That's something else I would do. I would just run a mile, run around where I live. Something to distract yourself. That doesn't have to be escapism. That doesn't have to be um go get fucking wasted in a bar. There are other ways to escape. Earlier you mentioned kind of like going out into nature. I think that's one way of doing things. You do need to be careful that you're not just anytime something bad happens, I'm gonna go to the park so I don't have to talk to anyone and not face my problems. That's not what I'm saying. When you come back, your problems will still be there. What I'm saying is find other alternatives to de-stress, to let go. I
Mm-hmm.
think going to the gym, exercise, talking to people, talking with friends, engaging with new friend groups, those are all very positive behaviors that can help with stress.
Well, honestly, that's actually kind of a cool, interesting topic because I think that connects to the next episode that I'm going to do on psychedelics. Because I've been reading the Tibetan Book of the Dead analyzation by Timothy Leary, and one of the things that it very important is ego death is an important part of psychedelic use, where through the use of LSD or mushrooms or whatever psychedelic, you end up killing your ego essentially. The self connected to your consciousness is gone, and all that remains is that you know that the fact that you're a conscious being. Everything you like dislike, anything that makes up the structure of you is stripped away from your consciousness. And for a second, you can look at everything in the most objective way possible. Leading to that with stress, I feel the deepest connection with stress is that ego. So I don't think everyone should just go willy nilly and start doing psychedelics. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is, in those ways of escaping or dealing with stress, is finding out how to get rid of those things and just focus on yourself, as a conscious human being. How do you solve these problems? Because a lot of people let a lot of their prejudgments and biases get in the way. And when you do that, when you do this, you're objectifying your scenario. You're making it as objective and real as possible. And I think
Question: Do you equate ego to expectations?
I think so. I think it's almost impossible to separate the two because your experience is based on your ego. Everything that you get, anything you get out of a given experience is based on your ego. Your ego. Someone may or may not enjoy something, but that's based on themselves. So their expectations of a given scenario absolutely come from that ego, right? That would make sense to me.
Because I think that, you know, most of the stress we get outside of maybe certain day-to-day responsibilities does come from our desires and what we wish to accomplish, and therefore the expectations we set upon ourselves, right? And nowadays, the reality is, especially for people around our age, is that there are things that you have to have, things you need to accomplish. There are these essentially, sorry, there are these, I'm gonna phrase this, there are these checkpoints almost, that everyone needs to get to at some point, or just are looked down upon.
Mm-hmm.
You could go on Instagram, you can go on Twitter, you can go anywhere, Snapchat, look at people's stories, and you'll find that everyone's always posting their best moments, everyone's always posting their achievements, and we always want to compare ourselves and set expectations that are
Mm-hmm.
not real
Yeah.
and
No.
add unnecessary things onto ourselves.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. You do that all the time because it's easy to get caught up in wanting to be the best, but not the best self, the best someone else. No one ever wants to be their best self. Not unless they come to that realization, which is something I came to. It took some time, but I came to the realization. I don't want to be the best someone else or the best this or the best that. I want to be the best possible me. Because and doing anything more than that is, um, it's just not worth it. If say this random person, their goal is to be the best video game, I don't know, Smash Bros. They're the best Smash Bros. Player, right? They want to be the best, and it's not saying that they can't be the best like Smash Bros. Player. What it's saying is that it has to be part of their plan of being the best themselves. And a lot of people just associate things and being the best thing, and they never focus on being the best themselves.
Or sometimes they do, but the way they do it, or rather the way they go about doing it, isn't best for their own health, for their own mentality, right? They will start taking a ton of things upon their shoulders and hope that they will succeed, but then rarely do they have a plan, a mental plan of, okay, what is this going to cost me? What am I giving up in order to achieve this? Am I going to be
Mm-hmm.
able to handle the stress that I'm putting on myself? Again, stress doesn't have to be a bad thing.
Yeah,
We all
no.
just happen to almost exclusively force it upon ourselves to be a bad thing. By
Yeah,
having stress come as a result of high expectations, poor management of our responsibilities. It comes with a few things, I think.
that's really interesting because that actually brings up like a past memory from AP psychology back in my senior year of high school. We were learning about all the mental disorders or all the mental disorders that are required for the AP psychology test.
Yeah.
And one of them, it almost never gets talked about. It wasn't on my AP test. Was post traumatic growth, where through a stress, it's opposite of post traumatic stress disorder, where through a traumatic event, a stressful event, a big stressor, um, people grow out of those scenarios and become stronger, better people. Which people don't ever talk about that, and it happens more often than you think. People are
Oh,
like,
absolutely.
people,
But usually not in the way people expect.
yeah. Well, I remember what the example was like. Someone got their home destroyed during a storm, and they're just able to. They built their own house back from the foundations themselves. They made the plans, they did it all themselves, and they felt great about doing it. Which it happens, and it happens more often than people think. It's not.
I
People would
think you
be
don't
like,
even need to go. You don't even need to go there. I mean, you get fired from a job
hmm
and you are lost. You have no clue where to go from now. You are stressed out because you had no money saved. How are you going to afford rent? Oh my God, everything's crumbling down. Life is in shambles. Uh, but then you get a new job.
yeah.
And outside of that stress, start saving money. Have a retirement fund and you have savings accounts planned. You could easily argue that you grew out of, or rather, you grew from that stressful situation. And, anyone can typically say, well, you learn from your mistakes. Okay. Are those mistakes not stress related?
hmm
Like, were you not stressed when those things occurred? We
hmm
see growth from stress all the time because we learn, right? It allows us to learn. It allows us to see what we did wrong and hopefully work to remedy that and to avoid having that situation. Stress can often be bad.
Well, I
That
mean,
doesn't
like,
mean it's exclusively bad.
let me think about working out. Right, working out is self-induced stress,
This
both
is the
in
best example of, yeah. Okay, okay. So when we first started talking, that was one thing I wanted to mention, but I didn't simply because I felt like it is such a unique case. But you're right. Carry on.
it's self-induced stress in both the mental sort of way, but in the physical way too. Physics wise, it's stress. Um,
Yeah,
and
no,
people grow at it.
it is the most dictionary-like definition of how stress can help because the way it works is you're basically adding stress to your muscles to have them be able to handle more and more stress from which there can be growth. If I take it to an extraordinarily basic explanation, that
Mhm.
is what working out is. It is adding stress to your muscles to induce resistance to that and therefore growth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think that's really interesting because I think that also applies to the mind. Do people do that too, right? People do those things to the mind too. Um, Puzzles come to mind. That's self-induced stress. It's literally, oh, here's a puzzle. It's mental stress. People put them, and people love doing those things because it builds their mind. They love doing puzzles and solving word things, and even video games. Some people just grow out of that. Mentally, they learn more. They develop the mind. Feels like a workout. It's good, and to a limited degree, it's good for your mind. Do it playing games, playing a really hard video game, doing puzzles. It's good for your brain. At a limited point, just like you can work out too much. You can do anything too much. But that little bit of mental self-induced mental or physical stress is still good for you.
Absolutely. I mean, stress, it is truly just a coin. It all depends which side you're looking at.
And don't get me wrong, people can do self-induced stress and it can be bad too. And I've seen it happen all the time. People just worry about things that they just don't need to worry about. It's like, okay, you don't need to worry too much. You're causing your problems. You're
The
causing them to breathe.
world could end tomorrow. Random comet hits the planet. Oh no. But why am I going to care about that if I can't do absolutely anything to alter that? I think when it comes down to stressing or things we shouldn't stress about, it really comes down to, is it something that you can affect? And is it something that's worth worrying about now? And I think most people have their own personal criteria for the latter of that, right? So a lot of people have their own personal criteria of when should I care about something? Is it with things that can affect me 10 years from now, 5 years from now? People have their own individual criteria, and I think that's fine. What I don't think is fine is when people stress over things that are completely out of their control.
Hmm.
You know, I don't want to ever live in California. Not because I don't like the place, not because I don't like the people, just because there could be an earthquake. That is such a narrow way of looking at things.
Yeah.
Because you are worrying over things that are completely out of your control. I don't want to
Hmm.
move to any of the tornado alley states or areas because I'm worried there's going to be a tornado. Yes, it's possible. You could even say it's likely. But you can't allow things that are out of your control to dictate your life because when you do that, you limit yourself and you add stress that just doesn't have to be there. Only worry about things you can actually affect. Might be in the long run, might be in the short run. That depends on your personal criteria, as I mentioned earlier. But only worry about things that actually concern you.
I,
Things where you
I,
can have an input, right?
hmm I think there's a third dimension though to that. You said those two layers. I think there's another, and I think the other layer is how much do I have to do to change the given scenario? If you have to do a million, like I'll think about something like, oh God, there's this thing, but it's worse if there's a million things I have to do. But I already see a lot of times
So,
is people will stress
so
out about one little thing they have to do. Like there's one tiny thing they have to do, and they're stressing out. It's like, hey, you only have one thing you have to do to resolve this scenario. Why are you stressing so hard about it?
I feel like that is being unable to appreciate the bigger picture. I think that's what that comes down to. It
Mm-hmm.
is being unable to appreciate the bigger picture, being unable to see everything holistically. I dislike that term because it reminds me of just college admission programs, but um,
Oh,
I think it is fitting for this, and it is just you need to be able to realize what your input has in the overall kind of range of whatever problem you're looking at. Let me get somewhat. Uh, it's I know this can be somewhat controversial, but just sort of a bit of flair. Let me just talk about recycling, or no, rather, let me talk about waste management. There you go. I think that's a better way to phrase it.
mm-hmm.
You could have a city like Houston manage its waste properly. Everyone recycles. Everyone manages their waste properly. And what's that going to matter in the big picture of waste in Texas? Nothing. Here's why. Because you're assuming that because your neighborhood does something, you're going to have a big effect. Not trying to be a downer. I'm just looking at the big picture here. It's not going to matter when most of the waste isn't coming from people, it's coming from corporations and big organizations. If those people are are the ones responsible for 80% of something, why are you, poor and invisibly small percentage of the rest of the 20% caring?
Hmm.
I'm not saying that your actions have no impact. What I'm saying is don't live your life focusing on the impact your actions have when you're ignoring the bigger picture of those actions. Instead of focusing so much on recycling personally, focus so much on talking to politicians, to whoever represents you to get action done against the
Hmm.
sources of that um, pollution or the sources of that lack of waste management. Able to appreciate things in life by seeing where you can have an input that actually matters instead of over worrying, which is what we do most of the time.
No, I definitely agree. Over worrying is that causes most of my problems. That's why most of my problems happens because I'm just like, oh, what about this thing, this thing? It's like none of it really all that much matters at the end of the day, and I can get it done pretty quickly. I'll put things off. Procrastination strikes. I know you. I know you've talked to me about your procrastination days, but you
I
know,
happen to be an expert on the subject matter.
you know, and that really causes stress. But at the end of the day, you have to realize how to center yourself, and I think that's the most important.
I think this is the third time you've said that term. I want you to kind of define that for me.
Centering
For
your sense.
yes, to you, what is centering yourself? I have an
Ah,
idea, but I want to hear your.
it's finding every little bit about yourself, everything that makes you you, good, the bad, the ugly, everything that makes up your personality, your and maybe it's a psychedelic reference, your ego, and finding how that relates to you in the rest of the world. How do those things relate to you in the rest of the world? What things can you work on? What things can you make better? What things do you need to get rid of? And consciously being aware of that throughout your life. Of these are the things
That's
that
hard.
it's hard.
that
It's
sounds
hard. It's
that
really
sounds
hard.
very hard.
It's very difficult, and I've only been in that state a few times in my life. Where you're just completely centered with yourself. It's hard, but I think that's the key to uh, getting rid of stress, easing stress, and just living as stress free as possible. I don't think anyone's going to get perfect because I feel it's kind of Buddhistic or, godlike to do that kind of thing. But you can get close. And, the whole idea of getting close to becoming God is being God, kind of getting Eastern here. But um, I think that is the closest way you can get to it. And no one's going to achieve it perfectly. So no one's going to go out here and be like, oh, I'm the perfect center. I mean, there's probably a few monks or whatever that can meditate to the point where they just, their brain is going crazy. They feel just at one with the universe. Yeah, okay, but that's like 3 people per every country that can do that. That's nothing. But if you can just achieve it for a little bit throughout your life in bursts, even for a day, even for an hour, if you can feel that way, that's good and that's what you want to try to achieve.
I don't know. Uh, that just sounds really hard. I mean, it sounds like an amazing goal, but personally, I just try to pace myself. Just pace your stress. Like balance your stress with things that allow you to disconnect. Add add something physical, add something mental. Add a video game, add an hour of exercise every day. Add a bit of
And those little
partying,
things.
but don't let it be escapism. Add a bit of, if you want to get high, you can do that too. But don't let it be escapism. Try to diversify the way you pace yourself and diversify how to handle stress.
No,
And if
I
you do
mean,
that, you're gonna have a good time. I think that would be like my kind of ultimate slash final tip, you know?
yeah, I think
Face
that's a
your
good closing remark.
stress.
I think that's a good closing remark to end on. Yeah. Well, thank you for being my guest. I enjoyed talking with you.
Yeah, man, it's doing great. Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been fun.
Yeah. Tune in next time to episode 5.